18 years ago on this day, the United States of America was changed forever. On September 11, 2001, over 3,000 innocent victims were killed because of the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and the attempted White House.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Gavidia from NHSTV here with Ms. Polk talking about the events on 9/11. What do you recall about the events that unfolded on 9/11?
I was working in a lab still, and one of my colleagues noticed that that he was having a hard time accessing a CNN website, and so we switched to radio. One of my friends had a radio. I was listening to the news report and heard when they announced that the first tower fell.
The cashier at ShopRite, where I had gone after I dropped my kids off, mentioned that a plane had hit the World Trade Center. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's crazy. What a tragic accident. So I checked out at the cashier and I got in my car and I turned on the radio and I was listening to Howard Stern talk about the plane that had hit the World Trade Center and what a terrible accident it was. And it wasn't until I got home and turned on the TV that I had realized that the second plane had hit and that ultimately it was so much more than just an accident.
I recall I was in the school library that day. I heard from retired Miss Melnick that a plane had flown in, and I just thought it was an accident, and she looked at me a little curiously like it wasn't. And so when the second one hit, obviously we knew, I was sure what happened, and then it wasn't an accident. I also remember my wife pulling into the parking lot trying to get me home as if, we were so close to home, and it kind of made me realize how close we were to it, because I wasn't thinking about it that much, because New York City is obviously close to us, and I never looked at it that way.
Once they started announcing that highways were being closed, that seemed like a good time to drive home, since I had a long drive from that particular job.
Well, I remember panic, just extreme panic. Everyone was scared. Everyone was glued to the television watching as the planes hit. I was watching as the second plane hit. So I just remember panic.
Oh man, the horror! I worked right across the river from 9/11, so it was happening as my day progressed. I mean, it was just awful. Oof, just the horror on people's faces. Driving home from Jersey City and watching people standing in the streets, just looking at the Trade Center, just in disbelief. I mean, it's when it happens. It's a day that'll hopefully never be repeated, but it was simply awful.
I tell my students this. I was in my classroom over there. I was taking attendance for my second period class. And Ms. David came in and said a plane hit the World Trade Center. I thought she meant one of those like small little single engine planes, and the guy was just the worst pilot in the world and he missed a big building. But then word started coming to us that it was passenger planes and it was a coordinated attack, and the news just kept getting worse and worse that day, and it was a very difficult day for us, because we didn't know. There was so much unknown, and it was scary.
One of the things I remember about that particular day is how quiet it was, because all the planes were grounded. And since I grew up in Elizabeth, which is where about a third of the Newark airport is, I've just heard planes like all my life. And so not seeing them in the air really was kind of eerie.
I realized I didn't want to work in Manhattan anymore. And sometimes I think you take things for granted. When you have certain freedoms, you take them for granted. But really, our world changed that day. Our world changed. We became a little hardened. We got punched in the face that day, and we learned how to deal with it a little better, I think, certainly in the 18 years since.
Do you think the Victims' Compensation Fund is enough to take care of those who became ill during the cleanup of Ground Zero?
I think it's kind of terrible that people have been holding some of that fund hostage, apparently, and not protecting the people who've been protecting everyone else.
Well, they just added to the fund, right? They just voted in Congress to have lifelong, I think, health care services for all victims and family members, I think. So I think that's certainly a good start. It's expensive. We certainly have fiscal issues in the country, but I mean, it's certainly a good start. And the cleanup, hopefully the ground is clean at this point because people are working down there. But you know, it's certainly what they've done. I think is good now. It was shortly. There was a shortcoming for a long time.
I don't think you can give enough. I don't know what enough would be. It can never be fair.
You really obviously can't compensate people for all of their losses. So it's tough to say.
Thank you, Mrs. Harbison.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience.
Thank you for sharing. Back to the studio.